Low light photography. It's something that I see done incorrectly all the time on the internet. And in today's video, I'm gonna be showing you guys a little bit of my process on how I make my low light photography look good. So you guys can improve your low light photography and not make the same mistakes I see a lot of people on the internet make. If you guys are familiar with my work and you follow me on social media, you'll know that a lot of my work is done in very dimly lit situations. Even though a lot of light isn't present, I still manage to get very beautiful photos through the way I use the light that is available. So if you guys are interested in learning my process, make sure you stick around for the entire video so you guys don't miss out on anything. But before we start this video, as always, make sure to like and subscribe. It really does help this channel grow. And while you're at it, go ahead and drop a comment section in the comment section below. It helps the algorithm push my content to new viewers, which is always awesome. And I appreciate every single one of you that does. In this video, I'm going to be breaking down a couple of the things that make my low light photography good. But I do want to preface this video by saying that I am going to be making a separate video for each one of the things because there's so much information that I can't really jumble it all together in one coherent video. So if you guys want more details on each one of the topics I'm going to be talking about, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on the individual videos that I make for those later down the road, as I will be making separate videos for each and every single one of the big topics that I talk about, because there's just so much to talk about and I can't fit all of it into one video. But for this video, I am going to do a little bit of an overview on a couple of things, and I do think that understanding these things I'm about to talk about will be a lot more beneficial than just not knowing them in the first place. So let's go ahead and break down low light photography. I'm going to be breaking it down into 3 topics. The first is going to be gear, the second is going to be lighting, and the third is going to be editing. So if you guys want to just dive right into a specific topic, I will have them in chapters on the timeline. But let's go ahead and just dive right into it and talk about gear. Now, I know a lot of people on the internet love talking about gear and they like saying that gear doesn't matter. And then there's other people that say that gear does matter. And there's people that say that gear doesn't matter, but then they shoot with like a $10,000 camera. For the majority of photography, gear does not matter. You can make a lot of really amazing work with very cheap gear. I did so myself when I first began, but it does matter if you are going to be doing low light photography. Let me explain why. When it comes to low light photography, there are certain thresholds that each camera can get to before the photo just completely starts breaking apart. If you guys are very serious about doing low light photography and you haven't yet purchased your camera, definitely look into buying a Sony. Sony just blows everything else out of the water. Their technology, their sensor technology is just so much better than everyone else, and they allow you to push the ISO very high and still maintain a very clean image, which if you're doing low light photography is something you definitely want, because there are going to be situations where you just don't have enough light available to get proper exposure, and pushing the ISO and still having it be clean is definitely something that comes in handy more often than not. So things to look out for when you're trying to purchase a camera for your low light endeavors is make sure you can get as big of a sensor as possible. If you can get full frame, try and get full frame, because a full frame sensor is going to allow more light to actually hit the sensor, and it's going to produce a clearer image, and it's going to allow you to capture more detail than a smaller sensor. So if you guys have ever seen photos taken with like a micro four thirds sensor, they fall apart really fast in low light because there's just, the surface area is so small that it's very hard for those kind of sensors to capture very good detail in low light. When I first started off my journey, I was using a Sony a6400, which is a crop sensor, but again, it is a Sony. So with it being a Sony, it does have slightly higher ISO tolerances than the competition, but I did eventually upgrade to a full frame because, like I said, a lot of my work is done in low light, and having that full frame is definitely a game changer. And I've noticed that my photos stay together a lot better in higher ISOs with my full frame than they do with my crop sensor. So when you're focusing on purchasing a body, that's what I would look for. I would just look for a camera that has really good ISO performance and really good sensor. But that's not the end all be all. You also want to make sure that you have a fast lens. What I mean by fast is you want to make sure that the lens you're using has a good aperture, and a good aperture for low light is 1.8 and below. You don't need to go crazy and go spend a ton of money to get like a 0.95 lens, although that would help. It's not necessary. I personally just use 1.8. I feel like it's a really good sweet spot. You can shell out some more money and drop it down to like a 1.2, but again, the difference isn't enough for me to justify spending an extra $1,000 for some of these 1.2 lenses. So as long as you can get 1.8 at a decent price, I think that is a really good lens choice. And I personally just use the Sony 50mm 1.8 because I find that it's small, it's compact, and it opens up to a 1.8 aperture, which is awesome, and it helps me to capture as much light as it possibly can, which when paired with my Sony a7 III, the combo is just really, really good in low light. I don't know what else to say. Any 1.8 lens with a a7 III is going to be a solid combination. Again, gear doesn't matter all that much in photography, but in low light, you definitely want to make sure you're making some investments into what gear you are using, because it'll just make your life way easier and it'll make your images so much cleaner. Everything else, gear doesn't really matter, but low light photography definitely does. It's not the only thing that matters, so if you can't afford really good gear, don't worry, you can always just emphasize getting these next two things done perfectly. And the next thing I'm going to be talking about is lighting. So if you guys are familiar with my work, and if you've watched my previous videos, you will know that I don't use super expensive lighting in my photos, and I'm still able to capture good stuff. And the reason is because I understand how to properly light my subjects even when there's barely any light available. So there are some things you need to know when you're lighting your subject in dimly lit environments, and I'm about to talk about them right now. First and foremost, and probably the most important thing, is make sure your model's eyes are illuminated. If your model's eyes aren't illuminated correctly, the photo is just not going to look good. The photo is going to look off. There's going to be that disconnect between the viewer and the photo, because as humans, we like to make eye contact with other humans, and if the model's eyes aren't properly lit, then we can't make the connection and we lose interest in the photo a lot faster. Whatever you're doing and however many lights you have, make sure that you have your model's eyes illuminated. Obviously, there are exceptions to this. If you're doing silhouette work, or if you're doing some kind of really crazy pose where the hand is covering the eyes or something, that's obviously, you can't illuminate the eyes if they're not visible. But for the most part, if you are doing portraits and you are doing some more dramatic portraits, really pay attention to the eyes and make sure that they're illuminated. It'll help out a ton. The next thing you need to focus on with your lighting is creating depth in the image, especially if you're using RGB lighting. I see so many people on the internet use RGB lighting, and they do it in this weird way where they blast the model with light and they blast the background with light, and everything is just the same light. And although it looks cool to some people, in my opinion, it looks absolutely horrendous. Let me show you guys a couple examples of what you should not be doing with RGB light. The reason you shouldn't be doing this is because when you do this kind of stuff, what you're doing is you're flattening the image. You're taking any depth away from the image. As the light is emitted and as the light is blasted onto the models, it's also blasted onto the background, and this creates this solid tone across the entire frame, which just completely flattens the image by reducing any shadows and reducing any gradients. When you're lighting your subject, because you're using very little light, you want to make sure that you're using the light to your advantage, and you're creating a nice roll off from the highlights into the shadows, and you're using those shadows to your advantage. You really need to be paying attention to the shadows, where the shadows fall, and using the shadows to shape the image as much as you use the light to shape the image. You need a good balance in both. You can't have a dimly lit photo and have all the shadows filled in with a super bright RGB color and expect the image to look good, because at the end of the day, you're just going to be flattening the image and it's going to look horrendous. So when you're focusing on lighting, make sure you illuminate the eyes, and make sure that you pay attention to these shadows, and make sure that you create depth with lighting. Again, I'll be making a separate video on lighting because lighting is an entire beast in its own. But those 3 tips are tips that I can recommend anyone start implementing right away, so you guys don't make the mistakes that a lot of these people on the internet make. And finally, the last thing that is going to improve your low light photography is going to be the editing. Edit your photos. Whoever you are, your photos are not good enough to upload without editing. I don't care. I don't want to hear the argument that a good photo can't be edited. That's baloney, okay? That is absolute baloney. Every photo that you see on the internet, every photo that you see in magazines and books and everything, they're all edited. Now, obviously, there's different editing thresholds. I don't do any retouching and stuff like that because I feel like it looks unnatural, and I don't want to be giving people false standards. But I do like to edit the colors, and I do like to control the highlights and shadows. So edits that you guys can make within Lightroom or whatever image processing software that you have is denoising. If you have a denoiser, use it. Don't blast it to the point that your photo looks like a cartoon, but if you can use denoise to reduce a little bit of that noise that is going to be inevitable in low light photography, then do so. If you can use a denoiser to take away the color and just make it black and white grain, that is going to help so much because it's going to create less distractions in your image. It's going to make the entire image look a lot cleaner. You'd be surprised how much of a difference a denoised image can look like with and without the denoise added to it. Although it doesn't seem like it's a huge difference, it definitely is. And there's so many people that don't understand this and so many people that don't utilize this tool in Lightroom or whatever other image processing software you use. And because of this, their photos come out looking really grainy and you can see the colored noise and it just looks like an entire mess. And it looks like they don't really know what they're doing. And in the end of it, they really don't because they don't have the editing locked down. So to wrap it up, the 3 things that are gonna make you a better low light photographer are having moderate to good gear, making sure that you understand how to use light to create depth within your photos, even if not a ton of light is available. Remember, less is more sometimes, and denoising your images and editing your low light photos to have a neutral look instead of trying to boost all the information in there, which is just going to dirty up the image and ultimately make it look worse than it was. So if you guys can follow those 3 things, your low light photography will instantly become better. If you guys like this video, make sure to like and subscribe. I will be making a separate video for each one of these topics where I dive way more into it and talk about them way more detailed. If you guys don't already follow me on social media, make sure you follow me. Everything is at Moody Darkroom. From my Pinterest, my Twitter, my Instagram, all of it, TikTok, it's all Moody Darkroom. So just go ahead and follow me on everything if you like to keep up with my content. Thank you guys for watching. With that being said, I will see you guys in the next one. See ya.